Welcome, everyone. Tonight's story takes us deep into Gettysburg National Military Park, a place where history never truly rests. Before we begin, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. And if you haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you never miss a new story. Now, let's get into it. I'll never forget the fog. It didn't sit on the ground like normal morning mist. It hung in the air, thick, unmoving, like a heavy sheet draped over the battlefield by a hand that meant to hide something. When I pulled into the ranger lot, it was so dense I couldn't see the visitor center, and it's a massive building. My headlights caught the faint outline of cannon wheels, the iron spokes looking like ribs sticking out of the earth. The whole place felt paused. Like the park was holding its breath, waiting to see what kind of person I was. They told me orientation would start at 7 a.m. It was barely 6:30 when I stepped out of my car, but the air tasted old, cold, metallic, like morning dew mixed with gunpowder. If you've ever been near an antique firearm after it's been fired, you know that smell. Sharp, sour, lingering. I tried brushing it off as imagination, first-day nerves, but then I heard it. Distant marching, not loud, not obvious. More like a vibration under the soil. Boot heels hitting packed dirt, steady, synchronized, purposeful. At first, I thought it was tourists doing some kind of early morning historical tour, though that would have been unusual. Then I thought maybe I'd wandered too close to the reenactment area. But I checked the schedule the night before. No reenactment events for another 6 days. Still, the rhythm kept going. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Like an entire line of soldiers was walking somewhere just beyond the wall of fog. I stood still, pulse climbing, waiting to see shapes appear. Voices, flags, something. Nothing came. The marching stopped all at once, like someone had snapped their fingers. That was the first moment I felt it. The battlefield wasn't empty. It was watching. I shook the feeling off and adjusted my new uniform shirt, still creased from the package, and tried to find the path to the visitor center. But the fog had swallowed everything. Even the sound of my own footsteps felt muted, like the ground was made of ash instead of gravel. Then I saw movement. At first, it was just a darker patch of fog drifting toward me. No shape, no definition, just a tall blur gliding forward. My spine tightened, and for a breath, I thought, this isn't human. But then the blur sharpened. A silhouette emerged, hat brim, long coat, straight shoulders, a person. She didn't call out, didn't wave, just walked right up to me, calm and steady as if she already knew exactly where I was in all that fog. When she finally stepped close enough for me to see her face, the name tag caught my eye, Ranger Collins. I'd heard of her, rumors mostly, that she'd been here for decades, that she worked dawn shifts even before she was officially scheduled, that she was the one who dealt with incidents visitors weren't supposed to talk about. She stopped 3 feet in front of me, close enough that I could see the lines carved into her cheeks from years of sun exposure and maybe something more. Her eyes were a pale blue, but not the friendly kind, more like the color of granite. "Morning," she said, voice flat. "First day?" I nodded, tried to sound confident. "Yes, ma'am, I'm supposed to meet..." She cut me off. "Before anything else, there are rules." Just like that. No welcome, no handshake, straight to business. She reached into the inside pocket of her coat and pulled out a folded sheet of paper, laminated, edges worn, like it had been handled by 100 hands before mine. 8 rules, typed neatly, simple font. She placed it in my hand with this strange sort of gravity, like she was handing over a legal document or a warning. I glanced down at it and skimmed the first couple lines. They sounded ridiculous, superstitious. Something you'd post on Halloween for tourists to laugh about. I let out a small chuckle, nervous, trying to break the tension. I figured she'd smirk, or roll her eyes, or tell me it was an old ranger prank. But she didn't. She didn't blink. She didn't move. Her voice dropped lower, not threatening, but final. "Don't lose that paper," she said. I swallowed. "Okay. Why?" Her jaw tightened. People say older rangers get dramatic with rookies, but this wasn't drama. This was something else. Fear being held carefully behind discipline. "Because," she said, "people who lose it don't make it past their first month." No sarcasm, no humor, no winking, just a fact, delivered in the calmest, most unsettling tone I'd ever heard. The fog around us shifted in that moment. Not a breeze, not air movement. Shifted, like something large had stepped overhead and disturbed it. My grip on the paper tightened. That was the exact second, right there, when the job stopped feeling like a national park position and started feeling like a warning I hadn't read in time. Collins nodded once, satisfied with the change in my expression, and said only, "Follow the rules. Follow them exactly. The park remembers, who doesn't." Then she turned and walked back into the fog until she was gone, swallowed whole by it, and I realized I was standing alone again. Except it didn't feel like alone. Not at Gettysburg. Not on that battlefield. Not ever. The ranger station at Gettysburg isn't modern. At least not the one Collins took me to. Most visitors never see it. It sits behind the main complex, half sunk into the earth like it's trying to keep a low profile. The wood is darkened from age, and every floorboard has its own personality. Some groan, some pop, some whisper when you shift your weight. I stepped inside, and the air smelled like old paper and pine cleaner. The desk in the corner still had a rotary phone on it. Unplugged, dust settled into the numbers. The kind of place where time doesn't really move forward so much as circle around itself. Collins motioned toward a chair. "Sit." No small talk. No coffee offer. Just business. I unfolded the laminated sheet she'd given me. The plastic was cold, like it had been kept somewhere much colder than the station. She tapped the paper with one finger. "Read them out loud. All 8 rules, printed neatly. Short sentences that felt too blunt to be meaningful." I cleared my throat and started reading. Rule 1. Never walk the fields at dawn without announcing yourself first. I glanced up. Announce myself to who? Collins didn't answer. She just nodded for me to continue. So I did. Rule 2. If you hear marching, do not look for the source. I paused again. You mean reenactors? Early tours? She shook her head once. Slow. No. She said it in a tone that made something cold settle between my shoulder blades. I swallowed and kept reading. Rule 3. Never follow a soldier who asks for help. That one got me. I actually laughed. Not out of mockery, but because my brain couldn't compute what it was supposed to imply. "A soldier?" I asked. "Like, asks for help," she repeated. "Doesn't matter how real he looks. Real, not costumed, not visitor dressed up. Real." Her eyes stayed locked on me until I realized she wasn't joking. I read the next one slower. Rule 4. If someone calls your name after dark, ignore it. A chill went through the floor and up my legs. The building was warm enough, old heater grumbling in the corner, but I swear the air around me dropped 10 degrees. Who would call my name? I asked. The corner of Colin's mouth twitched. Not a smile, more like the ghost of a reaction she didn't want to fully show. Depends on the night, she said. I didn't push for more. Rule 5. The wheat field must be cleared before sunset. No exceptions. I had seen the wheat field on the map, just looked like another part of the park. Visitors walked it every day. Photographers loved it around golden hour, but something in the way she leaned back. Something told me it wasn't just a close the gate before dark kind of rule. I wrote a mental note. Ask another ranger later. Though even as I thought it, I knew none of them would tell me more than she already had. Rule 6. If you see lantern light where there shouldn't be any, get indoors. I looked up again. You mean like poachers? Vagrants? Lantern light, she repeated. Not LED, not flashlights, lanterns. Her tone made the difference matter. Rule 7. Never talk about the 10th company. This one didn't even have context. Another Ranger superstition? Some historical inside joke. But Collins didn't treat it like a joke. Is that like a local nickname? I asked. No. A simple, sharp answer. That was when I realized she was choosing every word carefully, like she was trying not to give these rules shape, not to acknowledge anything more than she had to. Then I read the last one. Rule 8. If you feel someone behind you, don't turn around. Not until you're off the grass. Not if you see someone. Not if you hear someone. If you feel someone. That's different. That's intimate. I lowered the sheet. My pulse tapped in my ears. Nothing dramatic, just this steady, rising pressure. I don't understand, I said. Are these for safety? For wildlife? Visitors? Some kind of orientation tradition? I expected her to say something like, it's an old hazing ritual, or we just like keeping rookies on their toes. But she didn't. She looked at me with this expression that I later recognized as pity. Pity mixed with resignation. No, she said softly. The animals don't bother us. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees, voice dropping enough that the old heater in the corner nearly drowned her out. It's the leftovers from the battle. Leftovers. Not spirits. Not residual energy. Not hauntings. Leftovers. Like she was talking about the remains of a meal someone forgot to throw away. She let the words settle. Let me react to it. I felt a pressure behind my ribs, like my processing gears were grinding. What? What do you mean by leftovers? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the fog pressing against the glass. When a place holds the kind of grief this one does, she said, not everything moves on. She turned back, eyes steady, voice flat. And some things don't like being noticed. The heater clicked. Somewhere in the ceiling, wood shifted with an old house sigh. I looked down at the rules in my hands again. The laminate felt heavier than paper should. Like it carried weight, literal weight, from whoever wrote it first. Collins stepped closer, stopping just a foot from me. You follow those rules, she said, and you might get through your first month. Her tone never wavered. But if you break even one... She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. The battlefield had its own way of finishing things. My first solo patrol should have been the kind of shift rangers joke about. Easy hours, long quiet trails, the occasional lost tourist who somehow manages to wander off the clearly marked path. The kind of day where you come back with nothing more dramatic than a sunburn and a full bag of litter. That's what I expected. The sun had burned off most of the morning fog by then, leaving the battlefield washed in that soft golden light that photographers dream about. I started on the Millerstown Road loop, radio clipped to my vest, map tucked under my arm, feeling, finally, like an actual ranger. For a moment, I forgot the rules, forgot the laminated list in my pocket, forgot Collins' tone when she said leftovers like she'd lived alongside them her whole career. For the first hour, everything was normal. Birdsong, crunching gravel under my boots. A pair of tourists arguing about whether their great-great-great-uncle fought for the Union or Confederacy. A family taking pictures by a cannon, the little boy pretending to fire it at imaginary enemies. Just normal. Then the wind shifted. Not gradually the way weather usually behaves. Not a soft breeze rolling through the grass. It flipped, fast, like someone opened a door to a colder world. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in the space of one breath. The air hit my lungs sharp and icy, burning like winter air inhaled too fast. My hands prickled, the hair on my arms rising under my uniform sleeves. I stopped walking. The wheat field stretched out ahead of me, sunlit, warm-colored, looking peaceful enough to be a postcard. But the cold wasn't coming from the direction of the shade or the woods. It was coming from the open field itself. Then I heard them. Voices, not the laughter of tourists, not conversations, not whispers of wind through tall grass. These were commands, short, urgent, military. Hold the line, hold. Advance, medic, medic! The last one hit me hardest, like someone had shouted it directly into my ear. I felt my entire body jolt in response. My hand landed instinctively on the radio, but I didn't press the button. Something deep inside me, older than reason, told me not to answer, not to acknowledge, not to do anything except stand absolutely still. I scanned the field without lifting my head fully, keeping my eyes low, trying to use peripheral vision. The field was empty. No reenactors, no tourists, no shadows out of place, just sunlight, just grass swaying slightly. But the air around me was wrong, too cold, too still. The kind of stillness that feels deliberate, like it's waiting. I whispered under my breath, "Okay, this is just echo. Sound carries weird out here." Except it wasn't echo. Echoes don't sound like desperation, they don't shake your ribs, and they don't stop the second you move the wrong direction. I took one slow step backward. Just one. Instant silence. The cold didn't fade gradually. It snapped off, like someone flipped a switch controlling an invisible valve. The warm air rushed back, washing over my face and arms in a wave so sudden I nearly gasped. Every bird started singing again at once. I stood there, heart pounding, sweat starting to form along my hairline, even though moments ago I felt frozen. That's when Colin's voice, her exact tone from the ranger station, echoed sharply in my mind. "If you hear marching, do not look. Do not look toward it. Do not try to see it. Do not try to confirm it." My eyes were already drifting toward the tree line, instinct pushing me to check, for danger, for people, for anything real. But instinct was wrong here. The rules were right. My heartbeat thundered inside my ears. I forced myself to lower my gaze to the dirt under my boots, fixating on a small stone half buried in the path. Anything stable, anything solid. I didn't turn toward the sound. I didn't search for movement. I didn't try to explain it away. I just kept my eyes down and walked. Slow at first, then quicker, then at a steady pace that felt natural, like I wasn't running from anything, just going about my duties. But I felt it. Something watching, something behind me. Not close, not touching, but tracking my steps with the patience of something that had watched many footsteps on this ground before mine. My radio crackled, a soft, static pop. I froze, but then, nothing. No call, no voice, no request for confirmation, just silence. I kept moving, step by step until the gravel gave way to pavement again, until my boots left the grass entirely. Only then did the pressure behind me ease, like whatever had been trailing me stopped at the invisible edge of something I didn't understand. When I finally looked up, the wheat field looked exactly the way the brochure photos showed it. Golden, calm, beautiful even. But I knew better. I understood now what Collins meant by leftovers. The battlefield wasn't haunted in the Hollywood sense. It wasn't a place where ghosts jumped out or whispered in trees. It was a place stuck in a loop, a place doing reruns of the worst day in its own history, whether anyone was watching or not. I didn't tell anyone about that first patrol, but when I got back to the station, I slipped the laminated rules into my front pocket instead of my backpack. Some rules aren't made to scare you. Some are made to keep you alive. Devil's Den feels different from the rest of Gettysburg. The whole park carries a heaviness, sure, but Devil's Den has edges. The boulders jut out of the earth like something trying to break free. The spaces between them swallow sound in a way that makes your thoughts feel too loud. I'd been told by several senior rangers to keep an eye on the den. Never explained what that meant. Just that phrase, keep an eye, as if the place needed supervision. That afternoon, the sky was clear, but the light felt wrong, flat, like everything was slightly desaturated. Even the grass looked muted. I remember thinking the place looked sick. I did my usual sweep. checked the trails, scanned for tourists climbing where they shouldn't, made sure nobody had wandered off the designated paths. Devil's Den attracts people with cameras, thrill seekers, and the occasional person hoping to spot something ghostly. But that day, the rocks were quiet. Too quiet. I stepped up onto a flat boulder overlooking the small dip in the terrain when I heard someone call out, "Hey!" A kid's voice. High, clear, close. I turned, already preparing my, "Hey buddy, you need to stick with your parents" speech. There he was, standing on one of the higher rocks. He couldn't have been older than 12. Slim, pale, clothes hanging awkwardly off his frame. A faded Civil War kepi sat crooked on his head. His uniform looked like the ones the reenactors wore, but dirtier. Older, grayer, like it hadn't been cleaned since the actual war. He lifted his hand in a small wave, like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to. I sighed, more annoyed than anything. Kids climbing rocks without adults is a daily occurrence here. "Hey buddy," I called up. "You're not allowed to be up there without an adult. Come down, okay? Slow steps." But instead of climbing down, he just stared at me. Not defiant, not scared, just studying me. Then his shoulders slumped in relief, like he'd been waiting for someone, anyone, to notice him. "Mister," he called, "I'm lost." His voice cracked on the last word. And that, right there, hit me in the chest. I'd heard that tone before. Kids separated from their parents during summer tours, panic just under the surface, trying not to cry. Everything in me shifted into instinctive ranger mode. "It's all right," I said, raising a hand. "I can help you. Where are your parents?" He glanced left, then right, confused, like he didn't recognize any direction. "They were marching," he said quietly. "Marching," I frowned, heart starting to thud with slow, heavy beats. Maybe he'd wandered away from a reenactment group, though none were scheduled today. Still, kids get confused. Memory gets fuzzy when you're scared. I stepped closer to the base of the rocks. "Hey, it's okay. Just tell me." Then I noticed something that froze me in place. The dirt around him was untouched. No footprints leading up the rocks, no scuffed stone, no sneaker prints, no boot prints, no sign of his weight shifting or sliding or climbing. Just him, perfectly centered in a patch of dust so undisturbed it looked like it hadn't been touched all day. I felt it then, that tightening inside my ribs, like someone was squeezing from the inside. Rule number 3. Colin's voice rang in my mind crystal clear. Never follow a soldier who asks for help. Never. I swallowed hard. Something was deeply, terribly wrong. But the kid kept talking, his voice trembling with this strange mix of fear and urgency. "I can't find the right place," he said. "The spot changed. The rocks aren't where they were. The field isn't the same. I need to find the place where I—" He stopped, mid-sentence, like the words caught in his throat. I took another step back without meaning to. His eyes locked onto mine, not pleading anymore, angry, and not the kind of anger you see in a kid throwing a tantrum. This was older, heavier, the kind of anger that comes from being stuck in a moment too long. He whispered, barely above breath, "I didn't die here." My entire body went cold. He lifted a shaking hand, pointing toward a distant ridge across the field. "I died over there. Help me find the spot." The way he said it, flat, certain, made the ground under my boots feel unsteady. I didn't answer, didn't breathe, didn't move. I felt the urge, deep, instinctive, to climb the rocks, to grab the kid by the hand, to guide him. Every part of me was trained to help lost children, but every part of me also knew something wasn't right. Something wasn't human. The air around us rippled, not visually but emotionally, like the atmosphere had shifted pressure. I blinked, just once, a normal blink, and he was gone. Not scrambling down the rocks, not hiding behind a boulder, not running into the tall grass. Gone, like he'd never been standing there at all. The dust around him was still untouched, Perfect, smooth, untrodden. I stood frozen on the path for what felt like minutes, listening, waiting for any sound that would tell me he'd moved. Nothing, no footsteps, no breathing, no voice. Just the wind sliding between the rocks. When I finally managed to step backward, my boot hit gravel with a sound so sharp it made me flinch. I turned slowly, refusing to look back at the rocks even once. The rules weren't superstition. They weren't folklore. They were survival. And that boy, whatever he was, wasn't lost. He was looking for something. Something he wanted me to see. There's a reason every ranger at Gettysburg respects the wheat field more than any other place on the grounds. Not the round tops, not the peach orchard, not even Devil's Den, the wheat field. It's quiet during the day, almost deceptively peaceful, but once late afternoon hits, that peace turns brittle. The sunlight fades faster here, like the field steals it. Shadows stretch long and sharp across the golden stalks, and every senior ranger knows the rule. Clear the wheat field before the shadows reach the center. Don't wait, don't linger, don't test it. Tradition, they say, but traditions don't come with the kind of fear older rangers carry in their eyes. That evening, I understood why. I was running behind on my rounds. Radio call about a busted trail marker, lost family near the Trossel farm. All the usual chaos at peak hours. By the time I made it to the wheat field, the sun was already low, bleeding orange across the horizon. Still enough daylight, I told myself, plenty of time. The air was warm at first, humming with insects and moving gently with the wind. The stalks rustled like a soft, whispering crowd. I stepped onto the trail, doing my routine sweep, checking for trash, making sure visitors had cleared out. No one was left, just me and acres of tall, golden grass. I radioed in. Wheat field sweep beginning. Static crackled in response. Not unusual in this section of the battlefield. I kept walking. About halfway down the trail, the warmth evaporated. Not gradually. Gone. Like someone opened a freezer door in front of me. The hairs on my neck rose. I checked over my shoulder. Nothing there. But the shadows had crept farther than I realized. The field was darker now, the last of the sun sinking behind a ridge. And then I saw movement. At first, just a shape bending the stalks. Probably a deer, I told myself. But then a second shape, and a third, all the same height. All moving with the same slow, heavy gait. Shoulders low as if carrying something weighty across their backs. Rifle weight. I froze. The breath in my chest stuck like glue. The shapes drifted between the stalks. No color, no detail. Just silhouettes sliding along the rows. Too tall for deer, too broad for birds, and definitely not tourists. No human moves that quietly in dry wheat. The rustling stopped. One of the shapes paused, turned toward me. I couldn't see a face, just the outline of a man, a soldier. Head bowed beneath the slanted brim of a hat. The silhouette shifted slightly, like adjusting a strap or shifting a musket. I forced myself to breathe. "It's nothing," I whispered under my breath. "Light tricks, late shadows. You're imagining this." But then the shape lifted an arm, slow, deliberate, not waving for help, not signaling distress, a gesture of acknowledgement, recognition, like it knew exactly where I stood. My lungs tightened. The entire field fell silent. No bugs, no wind, no rustling. Just dead, suffocating stillness. The arm hovered for a second. Then the silhouette snapped its fingers. A sharp, crisp sound, far too real, too close, too modern. The ground seemed to vibrate for half a heartbeat. And then, boom! A gunshot ripped across the field. Not a pop, not an echo. A full-throated, unmistakable musket blast, the kind that shakes your bones. My ears rang instantly. I staggered back, hand flying to my radio, expecting screams. Visitors shouting, reenactors firing a blank, anything normal. But the wheat field was empty. There were no reenactments scheduled, no weapons demos, no blank firing events, no tourists. Just me standing in the middle of a battlefield that had gone instantly cold. I tried to key the radio. "Trossel, I need..." Static. I tried again. Nothing. Behind me, the wheat rippled outward, like something large had just passed through it at impossible speed, bending the stalks in a widening circle. My knees went weak. I did the one thing Collins had warned me never to hesitate about. I ran, not a fast jog, not a controlled retreat. I sprinted, boots slamming the dirt, breath tearing from my chest, the radio bouncing against my vest. The field felt endless, the trail stretching farther the faster I moved. Behind me, the wheat hissed. Not rustled, hissed, as if dozens of bodies were parting through it at once. I didn't look back, couldn't look back. Rule 2. If you hear marching, do not look. Rule 8. If you feel someone behind you, don't turn around. I kept my eyes locked on the exit, the last sliver of sunlight marking the trailhead like a lifeline. The second my boots hit gravel, warmth washed over me. Not gently, violently, like stepping from ice water into a furnace. The air filled with sound again. Insects, birds, distant traffic, normal life snapping back into place. I doubled over, hands on my knees, sucking in air like I'd outrun a stampede. When I finally dared to lift my head, the wheat field was still, golden, quiet, undisturbed. No shapes, no shadows, no sign of anything that had moved between the stalks. But the scent of gunpowder lingered, fresh, hanging in the warm evening air long after the sun disappeared. I didn't tell Collins what happened that night. I didn't need to. When I walked into the ranger station, dirt on my boots, shaking slightly, she looked at me from her desk and asked only one question. "You made it out before full dark?" I nodded. She exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for hours. "Good," she said softly. "Then it wasn't looking for you." That was the moment I realized. The wheat field remembers, and sometimes it reaches back. There are rules you think you'll never have to test. Rule 1? Easy enough. Rule 5? Makes sense when you've seen the wheat field at dusk. But Rule 4? If someone calls your name after dark, ignore it. I thought that one was superstition. Just ghost story seasoning. Something old rangers said to put rookies on edge. I believed that. Until the night he spoke to me. It was closing time at the visitor center. Tourism had slowed for the evening, and the last family had drifted out with their souvenir maps and postcards. The place looked peaceful. Dim lights, empty lobby. The gentle hum of the air vents echoing through the space. I was doing a final sweep before locking up, checking every exhibit, making sure no one had slipped into the theater or wandered off into a restricted area. Routine, boring, comforting even. Outside, the sky had turned that late evening blue, the kind that almost looks black but still holds a whisper of daylight. The battlefield beyond the windows was nothing but dark silhouettes, cannons, fences, monuments becoming shadows. I stepped out onto the front walkway to lock the outer doors. The night was still, too still, like the whole park was holding its breath. I took the key from my belt, and that's when I heard it. A voice, a man's voice, right behind me. Close enough that I felt the breath on the back of my ear. "Hey, Ranger." Calm, friendly even, like someone stopping you for directions. I froze, not because of the tone, but because I recognized the voice. Everyone who works here knows the story of Private Walker. Not a real private, just his nickname, a ranger from the late 90s who took history way too seriously. He spent more time off trail than on shift, convinced he could feel the battlefield trying to communicate with him. One night he went on patrol. He never came back. They found his hat near the Kodori farm, found his radio in the grass, battery drained. But Walker? Not a trace. No sign of struggle, no tracks, no body. People said he walked into the fog and the battlefield took him back. His disappearance became a cautionary tale, something rangers whispered to new hires the way firefighters talk about old stations or nurses talk about certain hospital rooms. But the voice behind me was his. Exact same drawl, exact same rhythm, exact same way he used to say ranger, half joking, half scolding. My stomach flipped, cold and hollow. I didn't turn around, couldn't. Rule 4 pounded in my head. If someone calls your name after dark, ignore it, ignore it, ignore it. But the voice came again, softer. Help me. The words slid into my spine like ice water. Not desperate, not panicked, just asking. And the worst part? It sounded so human. Walker? I whispered before I could stop myself. Instantly, the air behind me tightened, like the night itself inhaled. I forced my legs to move, stepping forward toward the visitor center doors. Slow at first, then quicker, gripping the handle so tightly the metal cut into my palm. Do not turn around, do not turn around, do not turn around. My heartbeat hammered in my eardrums. I yanked the door open and stepped inside. The moment I crossed the threshold, a cold hand pressed against the back of my neck. Not a tap, not a brush, a hand, human-sized, frozen. Skin like marble, my breath locked in my throat. For a second, just 1 second, it held there, fingers spread, as though pushing me gently forward, or pulling me back. Then it vanished. No sound, no lingering pressure, no footsteps retreating. Just gone. I slammed the door shut and stumbled backward, chest heaving. My breath fogged in the air even though the inside of the visitor center was warm. Collins found me sitting against the wall 10 minutes later, radio in my lap, hands shaking despite my efforts to steady them. She crouched down, her expression unreadable. You heard him, didn't you? My voice felt trapped, scraped raw, but I managed a nod. She closed her eyes for a long moment, not in fear, in grief. Walker was a good ranger, she said quietly. But the battlefield doesn't let go of everyone. Her gaze lifted toward the door behind me, the one I had locked, relocked, and triple-checked in the last few minutes. You're lucky, she whispered. He doesn't call many people by their job title first. My skin crawled. What does he usually say? I asked, voice barely audible. Collins stood slowly, shoulders heavy. Names, she said. He starts with their names. A chill struck through me, sharper than the hand had been. Why mine? I whispered. She shook her head. I don't know, but listen to me carefully. Her voice dropped into that tone she only used when the rules mattered, the tone of warning. If he calls again, do not speak, do not answer, do not look. She paused. And whatever you do, don't let him get in front of you. My hands trembled uncontrollably then. Because the part she didn't say aloud was the part every ranger knows. If the battlefield remembers you, it might try to keep you. The morning Collins finally told me about the 10th Company was the first time I saw real fear on her face. Not the kind of fear you get from a jump scare or a wild animal. The quiet kind, the kind that's been wearing someone down for years. She called me into the back office, a cramped room behind the ranger station with old Civil War maps pinned to the walls and filing cabinets that still carried the scent of rust and spilled toner. I figured she had paperwork for me, or maybe a complaint from a tourist. Instead, she shut the door behind us. No sound from the hallway, no radio chatter, just the soft hum of the old AC unit pushing out lukewarm air. She motioned for me to sit. Anybody talk to you about the 10th Company yet? She asked, voice low. I shook my head. She exhaled hard through her nose. Not annoyed, relieved. As if she'd hoped the others had left the burden to her, and now that burden was finally arriving. You won't read about them in books, she said. Not in ranger training, not in any historical registry. No plaques, no photocopies, nothing. Her fingers tapped the edge of her mug. Tap, tap, tap. A rhythm that didn't match any kind of calm. They weren't real soldiers, she continued. I almost laughed out loud at that. Of course they weren't real soldiers. Ghost stories never were. But her tone kept me quiet. They weren't alive during the battle, she said, leaning back in her chair. They showed up afterward. I frowned. How do soldiers show up after a battle? Her eyes drifted to the map on the wall. The wheat field, Devil's Den, Little Round Top, Peach Orchard, all marked with red ink from decades-old training notes. She didn't answer for a moment. Then she said, "They walked out of the ground." It hit me like a punch. Not the words themselves, but the way she said them. Plain, matter of fact, like she'd recited that sentence too many times. I shifted in my chair. "You saw that?" She didn't nod, didn't shake her head either. "They don't talk," she said. "Not a word." Her voice took on this tight, strained sound, like she was remembering something she wished she could forget. "They just walk, line by line. Formation perfect." A chill crawled up my spine. "What? Like reenactors?" I joked weakly. The room went dead still. Collins leaned forward, elbows on her knees, face inches from mine. No. There was no softness in her eyes now, no metaphor, just truth. Hard, unpolished truth. They're not reenactors, they're not visitors. They're not tourists in costumes. She swallowed. They're what's left when a battlefield doesn't get to rest. I waited for her to explain. She didn't. Not yet. Her hands opened and closed slowly, like she was warming them over a fire that wasn't there. "This land saw more violence in 3 days than most places see in a century," she said. "Thousands died in lines, shoulder to shoulder, men falling in the exact formation they marched in. When that kind of trauma sinks into soil..." She hesitated. "Sometimes it grows back into shape." I felt the hairs rise on my arms. She continued, "The 10th Company isn't Union or Confederate. They're not blue or gray. They don't wear uniforms you can identify. They're impressions, outlines, noise and memory stitched together into bodies." "Like shadows?" I asked quietly. "No," she said again. Firmer. Colder. "They're solid enough to leave footprints." My mouth went dry. "And they don't wander," she said. "They march, always the same path. Every appearance documented by Rangers since 1904 follows the same line." She got up from her chair and walked to the window, staring out at the fog creeping across the morning grass. The silence stretched. Finally, she said it. "And they recruit." The word landed in the room like a dropped stone. My heart thudded once, hard. "Recruit?" I asked. "Recruit what?" Collins didn't turn around. "You ever noticed how every ranger station has missing person files that don't match the official reports?" She asked quietly. "People who were never listed as visitors? People who weren't on the log? People who walked in at dawn and vanished after dark?" I thought of Private Walker, of the cold hand, of the voice saying, "Help me." Cold sweat prickled across my back. "They don't take everyone," she said. "Only those who notice them. Only those who look too long. Only those who answer." My throat tightened. "What do they do with them?" I whispered. She finally turned to face me. Her expression was raw, a mixture of anger, exhaustion, and something close to sorrow. "They add them to the line." The room felt suddenly smaller, the air heavier. The shadow behind her chair stretched a little too far across the floor. I swallowed hard. "You've seen them?" I asked. She didn't answer. Not directly. Instead, she said, "Rule 7 exists for a reason. Never talk about the 10th Company. Not with tourists, not with other staff, not even with yourself if you can help it." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Because the moment you speak their name, the moment you acknowledge them..." Her eyes locked onto mine. "They know you're watching." I felt something cold coil in my stomach. She put a hand on my shoulder, not comforting, more like a doctor bracing someone for bad news. "After you leave this office," she said, "you'll feel them around you sometimes. On patrol, in the wheat field, in the fog near the round tops." Her grip tightened slightly. "If you ever see them start to line up, walk away," I whispered. "What happens if I don't?" Collins didn't blink, didn't breathe, didn't soften. They make room. You learn quickly that Gettysburg at night is nothing like Gettysburg during the day. During the day, it's history. At night, it's something alive. On the night everything changed, I wasn't even on patrol. I was stuck inside the ranger station monitoring a severe weather alert. Strong winds, lightning strikes near the southern ridge. Nothing that should have been unusual. Just a routine overnight shift. The building was quiet. Too quiet. Just the soft scratching of the weather radio and the hum of the old fluorescent lights overhead. Around 2 a.m., I stood up to stretch and glanced out the front window. That's when I saw it. A lantern. A single, warm, flickering point of light drifting through the fog across the fields. Moving slow. Smooth. Steady. At first, I thought it was a headlamp. Maybe a lost hiker or some kid sneaking onto the battlefield after hours. But lantern light has a texture. A wobble. A glow that pulses like a heartbeat. And this was unmistakably lantern light. I stepped closer to the glass, narrowing my eyes. No tours run this late. No reenactors. No scheduled night programs. And no electricity outages. So why lanterns? The light drifted across the lower ridge, bobbing slightly like someone was carrying it at a walking pace. It didn't dart or wobble the way human hands move. It glided. Then, without warning, a second lantern ignited beside the first. A moment later, a third. 3 points of flame hovering in the darkness, forming a line marching in full formation. My breath hitched. I didn't need Colin's voice in my head to remind me, but it came anyway. Rule 6. If you see lantern light where there shouldn't be any, get indoors. My pulse jumped. I shut the blinds on the east window first, then the west, then the south. I checked the door locks twice, then a third time, my hands shaking against the cold metal. Lanterns are bad. Every ranger knows that. Lanterns mean you're seeing something that doesn't belong to this century. Something that sometimes comes closer if you watch for too long. I backed away from the windows and killed the overhead lights. The station dropped into darkness, save for the dim glow of the weather monitor. I waited. But curiosity is its own kind of curse. Against every rule, against every instinct, I crouched beside the window frame and lifted one of the blinds, just a sliver. What I saw made my stomach twist. The lights had changed direction. They weren't drifting across the field anymore. They were moving toward the ranger station. Slow, purposeful, unbroken formation. I dropped the blind instantly. The darkness in the room felt thicker now, like it had weight. I scrambled to the back door, latched, side door, latched, emergency exit, deadbolted. Every one of them rattled slightly, not from wind, but from me, checking and rechecking them with trembling hands. Then, silence. The kind of silence that makes your heartbeat feel like an alarm. I crouched behind the front desk, gripping my flashlight, though I didn't dare turn it on. My breath fogged faintly in the cold air. The temperature had dropped. Sharply, unnaturally. I heard it then. A faint, rhythmic tapping on the outside wall. Far too slow and deliberate to be branches or wind. Tap. 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 Like someone testing the perimeter. Then the scraping started. A long drag across the siding, moving from the back of the building toward the front. Something brushing against wood, against glass, against metal. I held my breath. The lanterns hadn't vanished. They'd grown brighter. The glow pressed through the blinds in faint, flickering stripes that moved. Left, then right, then stopped. Right outside the window. Waiting. Every ranger has their limit. Every ranger breaks at least one rule once, But Rule 6, that one isn't optional. If you look at the lanterns directly, sometimes they look back. I stayed hidden behind the desk, muscles locked, too afraid to shift even a centimeter. Minutes dragged on, maybe 10, maybe 30, maybe more. The lights didn't move, they didn't dim, they didn't disappear. They just stayed, watching. At one point, I swear I heard breathing through the wall, not human breathing, formation breathing. Many lungs inhaling together, many bodies moving as one. That was when I stopped being curious. That was when I finally felt fear the way Collins had described it. The kind that comes from knowing something ancient and unfinished has turned its attention toward you. Eventually, slowly, the lantern glow faded. First one, then another, and another. Gone. The moment the last flicker vanished, warmth rushed back into the room. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The weather monitor beeped again like nothing happened. I sat behind the desk for nearly 20 minutes before my legs stopped feeling like water. When Collins arrived for the morning shift, she didn't ask why the blinds were drawn or why every latch in the building was double locked. She just looked at me, really looked, and said, "You saw them, didn't you?" I nodded once. She nodded back. "They don't always stop," she said quietly. "Be grateful they did." Then she added, under her breath, "And never, ever let them see you looking. Everyone who works at Gettysburg talks about the wind sooner or later. Visitors think it's just weather, typical Pennsylvania gusts rolling off the ridges. But Rangers know better. The battlefield has its own kind of wind. It follows its own rules. It carries sounds that don't belong to the present century, smells that shouldn't appear in open air, and footsteps that you can feel but never see. But nothing. Nothing prepared me for the night the wind spoke. It started as an ordinary patrol near Little Round Top. The moon was out, thin, pale, and the trees cast long shadows across the granite slopes. The boulders looked like crouched animals in the half-light. I remember thinking the whole ridge looked like a frozen battlefield waiting for someone to press play. The air was warm at first, muggy, heavy with that late summer thickness that clings to your uniform. I was halfway down the trail when the temperature flipped. A single gust hit me from behind, sharp, metallic, like the scent of blood warming on steel. A smell I know too well from old barns and fresh-cut iron. Not natural, not weather. I stopped mid-step. The wind sharpened again, slicing past my ear like a warning. I turned my head slightly, not enough to break Rule 8, just enough to scan my surroundings. The trees stood motionless. The grass didn't stir. Even the nighttime bugs had gone silent. Then I heard it. Not the wind anymore. Footsteps, fast, heavy, running, pounding down the trail behind me with the weight of boots that belonged to another century. My instinct screamed at me to look, but Colin's voice slammed into my mind. Rule 8, if you feel someone behind you, don't turn around. Not on the grass, not on the ridges, not anywhere. I clenched my jaw so tight it ached. Just keep walking, I told myself. Do not react. Do not acknowledge it. Do not break the rules. My boots moved forward, one slow step at a time. Meanwhile, the footsteps behind me grew louder, closer, closing the distance with a soldier's determined stride. I felt the ground vibrate beneath my soles. That's when I realized these weren't just footsteps. They were marching cadence. The kind of cadence drilled into men trained to move as one. Heavy heel strikes, rhythmic, aggressive. I wanted to run. God, every instinct begged me to, but running would have meant looking, and looking would have meant becoming prey. Instead, I kept going, staring at the dirt, counting breaths. 1, 2, 3. But the footsteps didn't pass me. They slowed, matched my pace, a half step behind me. Whoever, whatever, was there wanted me to know it was right behind my shoulder, close enough to reach out, close enough to... A breath hit the back of my ear. Cold, wet, ragged. My entire spine locked. The breath was so close I could feel the condensation on my skin, like someone leaning close enough to whisper a secret. I didn't turn, didn't flinch, didn't breathe. I'd heard Collins say once, quietly, almost like a prayer, "If the battlefield chooses to speak, pretend you don't hear it." So I pretended, but the wind didn't pretend back. The breath came again, heavier, angrier, then a voice, low, gravelly, vibrating with something that wasn't human or alive. "You're on our ground." My vision blurred. My knees almost gave out, not because of the words, but because the voice wasn't behind me anymore. It was next to me, right beside my left ear, as close as someone whispering a threat inches from your face. Warm breath hit my cheek, even though the voice itself was cold. I kept walking, slow, mechanical, like a puppet refusing to acknowledge the puppeteer. "Keep moving," I muttered in my mind. "If it wanted to touch you, it already would have." The footsteps stopped. The wind died. The world went completely silent. I forced myself to take 5 more steps, then 10. When the gravel finally replaced grass under my boots, when I left the battlefield soil and stepped onto the paved path, I exhaled for the first time in what felt like minutes. My legs nearly buckled. My hands shook so hard I had to press them against my thighs. Only then, only once I reached the safety of the paved overlook, did I allow myself to turn around. The trail behind me was empty. No wind, no movement, no shadows. But halfway down the path, the grass was bent. Not from my footsteps, from someone or something much heavier pacing behind me. And in the crease of the trail, illuminated by moonlight, lay a single crushed leaf, pressed flat, not by boots, by formation. When I got back to the station, Collins didn't let me speak. She just asked one question. "You felt them, didn't you?" I nodded. She nodded back, slow, grim, resigned. "They don't talk often," she said. "If they spoke to you, then the battlefield knows your name now." Her voice cracked slightly. "And once it knows your name, it never forgets." It was after a long shift, one of those days where the silence felt heavier than the noise, when Collins finally told me the thing she'd been avoiding. We were sitting in the ranger station break room. The lights were dim. Coffee burned on the warmer, long-gone stale. The air smelled like old paper and rain-soaked uniforms. She sat across from me, elbows on her knees, eyes fixed on the floor like she was weighing whether or not to say the words. "You're not my first trainee," she said. Her voice was soft, too soft. A discomfort crawled up my spine. I tried joking to cut the tension. "Guess they didn't scare as easy as I do?" She didn't smile. Her shoulders sagged, a slow, defeated movement. "They're gone," she said. I shifted in my chair. "Gone? Like transferred?" She shook her head. "Gone." Something cold settled in my stomach. A weight, heavy, sinking. "What happened to them?" I asked. Her eyes lifted to mine, and the look she gave me told me this wasn't a story she enjoyed telling. It was one she carried like a bruise that never fully healed. "They stopped coming in," she said. The room felt smaller, like the walls were leaning in. She continued. "First day they're late. Next day no answer on their phone. By the 3rd day, someone goes to check their house." I swallowed. "And?" "The house is normal," she said. "Keys gone, boots missing. They took their pack with them. Everything looks like they got up early for work." "So, where do they go?" She inhaled slowly, deeply, the way someone does before delivering the part that hurts. "Their cars," she said quietly, "are always found on site." My heart thudded. "Where?" "Different places," she said. "Visitor center. The Round Tops. Trossel's barn. Sometimes at the wheat field turnoff, but always within park boundaries." A film of sweat formed on my palms. "And their radios?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. "Left on," she said. "Every one of them. Batteries drained from static." She clasped her hands together, knuckles white. "And security cameras?" She hesitated. That hesitation scared me more than anything she'd said so far. I leaned forward. "What do they show?" Her jaw tightened. "The same thing," she whispered. I felt my breath catch. "What thing?" She lifted her eyes, a slow, pained motion. "They walk into the fields at dawn," she said, "and they don't come back." The words hit me like ice water dumped down my spine. I imagined the scenes. Empty parking lot, boots stepping into the fog. No hesitation, no running, no turning around, just walking, like something was calling them. A call they couldn't ignore. I swallowed hard. "Why dawn?" I whispered. Her face changed, not fear, not sadness, recognition, as if this question had been asked dozens of times by dozens of trainees before they disappeared. "That's when the living and the dead share the same light," she said. The sentence made the room colder. I didn't fully understand at first, but she kept talking. "When the sun is low," she said, "and the fog creeps across the fields, the ground remembers, and sometimes it draws the wrong kind of attention." "Attention?" I echoed. She nodded. "The 10th Company marches at dawn sometimes. The shadows in the wheat field stretch in the wrong direction. The lantern lights flare up near the ridges. Everything on that battlefield is awake at dawn." Her voice dropped lower. "That's when the lines blur." I didn't breathe. She continued. "When the first rays of sunlight hit the grass, living rangers look just like the ones who died here. Same shape, same silhouette, almost the same shadow." A chill slithered across my skin. "The battlefield thinks they belong," she said, "and it calls them forward." My voice shook. "Calls them how?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the still dark fields as if expecting movement. When she finally spoke, it was barely a whisper. By name. My blood froze. "The missing rangers," she said, hand trembling slightly on the window frame, "weren't taken. They followed something. They heard something, something familiar. Something they thought needed help." She turned back to me. "And once you step onto the grass at dawn, you either belong to the living, or the battlefield decides you belong to it." My throat tightened. "So the trainees, they just walk into the fog?" She nodded. "Every time, same direction, same pace, like they're joining a formation that only they can see." I squeezed my hands together to stop them shaking. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. She stared at me for a long moment. "Because if the battlefield has noticed you," she said, "it might try to recruit you." I felt my whole body stiffen. Collins stepped closer, her voice stern, almost pleading. "If you hear your name at dawn, don't answer, don't look, don't stop walking." She paused. "And if your feet start moving toward the grass," she touched my shoulder gently, "run. There are mistakes you can walk away from. And then there are the kind that stay with you, etched into bone, burned into memory, carved into the soil you stepped on." Breaking rule. One was that kind of mistake. It was barely 5:20 a.m. A thin gray pre-dawn light pressed down on the battlefield, making everything look like it was dipped in ash. I'd arrived early, too early, planning to finish paperwork before the usual wave of tourists. Fog lay over the fields like heavy cotton, packed thick enough to swallow entire monuments. I couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. The entire world had shrunk into a small gray bubble around me. The silence was wrong. Not peaceful, not empty. Clean. As if something had wiped the slate of sound completely blank. And in that stillness, I forgot. Forgot the most important rule on the list. Rule 1. Never walk the fields at dawn without announcing yourself. No greeting, no call-out, no warning to whatever shares the light with us at this hour. Just me, walking blind into a place that didn't want me unannounced. I stepped off the asphalt. My boot touched grass. That was the moment the world changed. Instantly, marching. Not footsteps, not distant sounds carried on wind. This was close, violent, explosive. Dozens of boots, then scores, then hundreds. Slam, 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 pounding the earth in perfect, merciless cadence. I froze so fast my muscles locked. My breath punched out of my chest. The fog around me rippled, like dozens of bodies were moving just beyond the veil, their weight disturbing the air. I couldn't see them. I couldn't even see my own feet. My pulse hammered in my ears, my throat constricted. Every instinct screamed to run, but running on the battlefield at dawn is suicide. The marching grew louder, closer. The ground trembled beneath my knees like drums of war were pounding under the soil. Panic clawed at my lungs. I tried to inhale and got nothing. No air, no breath, no voice. Then, a shout tore through the fog, deep, urgent, human. "Ranger, get down!" I didn't think. I didn't question. I dropped. My knees slammed into the wet ground. My palms hit the grass hard enough to sting. I pressed my body against the earth, heart slamming against my ribs, waiting for, I don't know, impact, hands grabbing me, a line of soldiers trampling me under their boots. What came instead was a sound I'll never forget. Boom! A cannon blast so loud it punched through my chest. The shockwave rippled through the ground, lifting dirt and fog into the air. My ears rang instantly, a sharp stabbing pressure. The fog glowed orange for a split second. A muzzle flash from nowhere. Then everything went dark again. Silence fell, abrupt, total, complete. Like someone had hit a cosmic mute button. I stayed crouched, too afraid to move, too terrified to lift my head. Slowly, so slowly I thought I was imagining it. The fog thinned. Shreds of gray peeled away, revealing silhouettes. One silhouette moved toward me, a familiar one. Collins. Her face was pale, paler than I'd ever seen it. Her hat tilted back, her chest heaving with fast, terrified breaths. She grabbed my arm with a force that told me she wasn't angry. She was afraid. "You almost got pulled in," she whispered. Her voice trembled. Collins never trembled. I swallowed, throat raw. What? What just happened?" She didn't answer right away. She knelt next to me, gripping my arm so tightly her knuckles whitened. "Another minute," she whispered, "and you'd have joined them." Her eyes flicked toward the fog, toward the place where the marching had erupted, toward the direction of the cannon blast. I glanced that way too, but the fog had fully dissolved. The fields looked normal, peaceful even, like nothing had happened. But the air reeked of gunpowder, fresh, impossible, overwhelming. I forced my voice out. "Joined who?" Her jaw clenched. "The ones who walk at dawn." I shivered. "The 10th Company?" Grief flickered across her face. Grief so real it hurt to see. "No," she whispered. "Older than them." She pulled me to my feet. "You forgot the announcement." Her tone wasn't scolding. It was mourning. Like a doctor telling someone how close they came to dying. "You can't step onto this ground at dawn without saying who you are," she said. "The line between the living and the dead, it's thin at that hour." She squeezed my shoulders. "And today, they thought you were one of theirs." A chill climbed my spine, slow and precise, like a cold finger tracing each vertebra. I looked down at the grass where I'd knelt. Footprints surrounded mine. Not modern boots, not sneakers, not shoes. Civil War heel plates, rows of them, shaped in formation around where I had dropped. As if a regiment had passed, through me, around me, beyond me. I felt my stomach churn. "Why did they stop?" I whispered. Collins answered without hesitation. "They didn't stop." She swallowed. "You were rescued." "By who?" She looked at me with a haunted expression. "I don't know." Behind us, the fog fully lifted. The battlefield looked like morning again, but I knew better now. The dawn is when everything wakes. And sometimes, it wakes hungry. I didn't expect Collins to wait for me that evening. Most rangers clock out with the last tour and vanish into their cars, eager to shed the weight of the battlefield from their shoulders. But she stood alone on Cemetery Ridge, silhouette outlined by the setting sun. Hat brim low, posture still as a monument. The sky behind her was a wash of orange and blood-red streaks, the kind of sunset that feels too dramatic for real life. The fog crept low across the fields, like it didn't want to lose its hold on daylight. I approached slowly. "You survived your first month," she said without turning. There was something bitter in her tone. Not pride, not relief. Something closer to sorrow. She finally faced me, searching my eyes like she was looking for damage. Something broken, something missing. "Most don't," she said. Her words hung heavy in the cooling air. Then she pulled a folded, laminated sheet from her coat pocket and handed it to me. It was almost identical to the rule sheet she'd given me on day one, except this one had 9 rules. My stomach tightened. I unfolded it carefully, my hand suddenly feeling too clumsy. The first 8 rules were the same, the ones I'd lived under, survived under. But the 9th, it was short, blunt, terrifying. 9. If they ever call you by your full name, run. It means they've remembered you. My throat went dry. "Remembered me?" I asked, voice wavering despite myself. "Remembered me how?" Collins didn't answer right away. Instead, she placed a hand on my shoulder, gentle but firm enough to steal the air from my lungs. "Once they remember a ranger," she said quietly, "they don't forget." Her gaze drifted toward the battlefield, toward the shadows stretching long and thin, toward the places where soldiers fell and kept falling long after the battle ended. "You've been on their ground," she said. "You've heard them, you felt them, you broke Rule 1, you survived the wheat field, they've noticed you." She swallowed. "And once the battlefield notices you, you're never truly alone again." A chill slid down my spine. Not the abrupt, sharp cold I'd felt during encounters. This was slow, deep, settling in my bones. "Why give me the 9th rule now?" I whispered. She hesitated. Then, softly, "Because you'll need it sooner than you think." She squeezed my shoulder once, hard, then slowly released me. "Don't ignore the 9th rule," she said. "If they call you by your full name, it means they've pulled you out of the crowd." The sun dipped lower. The last warmth drained from the sky. Collins stepped away, walking toward her truck, boots thudding slowly against the pavement. Halfway across the lot, she paused, like she felt something behind her, then shook it off and kept walking. I turned toward the ridge. The fog thickened. The air went still. Too still. Then, boots, marching, slow, steady, in perfect rhythm. Not chaotic like battlefield noise, not frantic like retreat. Formation. My heart slammed against my ribs. Rule 8 whispered in my mind, "If you feel someone behind you, don't turn around." I clenched the laminated sheet in my hand so tightly it crinkled under my fingers. The marching grew louder, closer, deliberate. Then the fog behind me breathed, actually breathed, expanding with a sound like lungs filling with cold air. A presence leaned close. So close I felt the cold press through my jacket and into my skin. Then a voice, low, steady, unmistakably human and impossibly dead, whispered right into my ear. "Ranger Daniel Carter." I froze. My full name, my entire name. Not Ranger, not Carter. Daniel Carter. They remembered me. My blood turned to ice water. Every instinct begged me to look, to confirm, to face whatever stood inches behind me. But the 9th rule screamed louder. "Run." I didn't wait for the sentence to finish. I didn't breathe. I didn't think. I ran. I ran across the ridge, boots slamming into the dirt. I ran past monuments and cannons blurred by fog. I ran as long shadows reached for my feet. I ran as the marching behind me quickened, matching my pace. I didn't look behind me. Not once. The voice followed, growing stronger, closer. like someone was leaning over my shoulder, whispering through clenched teeth. "Hold the line." I didn't hold anything. I ran until my lungs burned raw, until the sky went dark, until I reached my car with shaking hands and slammed the doors shut. The marching didn't fade. Not completely. Even now, sometimes when I close my eyes, I still hear it. Boots marching, slow and steady, calling my name. Because Collins was right. Once the battlefield remembers you, it never forgets. And I haven't stopped running since.